to the Edinburgh Science Festival 2021. Today we are hosting a panel discussion on the topic Gendering Artificial Intelligence, the case of conversational voice assistants. My name is Verena Rieser. I'm a professor of computer science at Heriot-Watt University, and I'm working on the technology behind voice assistants such as Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, or Apple Siri. Today we are having a critical look at how the personas for these voice assistants are designed. You might have noticed yourself that most of them have female voices and some of them also have female names, such as Alexa or Microsoft's Cortana. But why, and what are the alternatives? Does AI have to have a gender at all? And what are the implications of gendering AI for our society and for our everyday lives? These are some of the questions which we are exploring in our panel today, and the panel will be hosted by Amanda Kerkas-Curry, who is currently completing her PhD on this topic at Heriot-Watt University. She will be hosting three amazing panelists, including Dr. Kate Devlin, who is a senior lecturer at King's College London. She's also the author of the book Turned On: Science, Sex and Robots, which examines the ethical and social implications of technology and intimacy. Our second panelist is Fiona Linton-Forrest, who is currently a user experience writer at the BBC, and most recently she's been part of the team that created the BBC's voice assistant called Beep. And finally, our final panelist is Mark West, who works at UNESCO, where he examines how technology and other innovations can improve the equality, equity and accessibility of learning. He's also the author of a report on gendered voice assistants. And this report was one of the main inspirations for a research project funded by the UK Research Council and now hosted at the National Robotarium at Heriot-Watt University. As you will hear today, the question of gendering AI is a complex and complicated one, which can't be solved by computer scientists or roboticists alone. And this is why we are taking a truly multidisciplinary approach in this project. So on the one hand, there's myself and my team at Heriot-Watt working on the technical challenges.
I'm working on automatic detection of the abuse that people direct at conversational assistants, which we do by training machine learning systems on data that's been labelled by humans. What we found is that a lot of this data is sexist or of a sexual nature, and also that people find it very difficult to agree on what is and isn't abusive or sexist. So this is a really complex problem.
Then there is the team at Strathclyde University, led by Professor Ben Jones, which is working on digital stereotyping from a psychological point of view.
And I'm leading a group of psychologists at the University of Strathclyde, investigating how acoustic characteristics of conversational agents influence the social stereotypes we form about them. For example, we're currently investigating the effect of increasing or decreasing the voice pitch of Alexa influences how trustworthy and cooperative other people find her to be. And in the next part of the project, we'll be investigating how these social stereotypes that we form about conversational agents influence how we interact in real life with real people.
And finally, there's the team around Professor Julie Robertson from the University of Edinburgh, who look at digital education to engage and encourage critical thinking about current technologies. So as part of this workshop today, we want to encourage critical thinking amongst our listeners. We will also send out a questionnaire in the end where we want to hear your views on gendering technology. And we are also hoping to get an idea whether this workshop has changed your mind or whether you got new ideas on whether gendering AI is really necessary. Enjoy the panel discussion.
We're here with Kate Devlin, Fiona Linton-Forrest, and Mark West, who have kindly agreed to participate in our event. So I'm going to start with Kate. The first question is, do you think AI should be gendered?
I think that AI, whether we like it or not, we're probably going to gender it because it's something that humans have been conditioned to do. So it's really hard to make a non-human voice, for example. Even if you have what we might term a machine voice or computer voice, we still have traits that would appear gendered to us, and we automatically decide to class that into male and female. And this is something that we are very much socialized to do. And so should it be gendered? These are machines, these aren't human, and they don't have our human traits. And yet at the same time, does it facilitate a better relationship if we're able to approach them in a gendered way? So I think I'm hedging here. It's kind of, maybe it's not ideal that we do it, but we're going to do it anyway. So maybe we have to think about how to do it responsibly.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you say about the humans do it anyway, because a lot of people name their cars, and they tend to name them actual names. And the car obviously doesn't have a gender, but humans do that. They put that personality onto their things, their possessions.
Nor is it new. In the work UNESCO did around Blush If I Could, we talk about how people have gendered inanimate objects since the beginning of time. Sailors have long referred to ships as she and her and given them women's names. Countries are often, depending on the country and the cultures, are sometimes given a sort of a gendered pronoun of some sort. I'm talking to you today from France, and in France, France is always a she. It's a human impulse that runs very deep. It runs across cultures, not all cultures, but many. And so I think it will actually, that this impulse, it does vary a bit from culture to culture, but it's something that's it's not historically new.
Do you think that to some extent the voice could ever be genderless if it's going to sound in any way human-like?
In our work, we talked a lot about how there are possibilities to make a sort of non-human voice. We give examples. There's a lot of examples in popular culture. You take a sort of C-3PO type of voice. There have been a lot of different characters, some of them even kind of AI type creations that don't have a distinct male or female voice. So I think there are avenues to at least cue people to the fact that you're not talking to a human. And whether it be sort of tilting towards male or female, that's a different matter. But we really flag the importance of some signifier that you're not talking to a person. We also talked about the number of countries coming out with legislation requiring disclosure. So, for instance, California in the United States has passed a law that if a machine calls you and is pitching a political candidate or selling you something, it has to legally disclose that you're not talking to a person. This is going to become more and more important as these voices become incredibly human. The Google duplex technology and other competing technologies. I mean, you cannot tell that you're talking to a machine. I mean, the syntax and the tone of voice is very, very human. But I think signifiers to show that it's not a human are very much needed.
And you mentioned cueing the voice. There's actually a sort of gender neutral voice assistant voice that was a project, and it was called Q, the letter Q, and the idea was that you aren't able to differentiate as to whether or not that voice was male or female. But of course people project still even then. And if you think about the robot Pepper, if anyone's familiar with that, Pepper was deliberately designed with a childlike voice because it's difficult to differentiate if whether it's a boy or a girl. And still there are raging debates over whether or not Pepper is a boy or a girl. Even though the creators of it said specifically on their website, Pepper does not have a gender. They actually, wrote that onto their original website. So again, there is this bit where we project and we decide, even when those aren't deliberately there. So yeah, it's really hard to do, but I completely agree that, we should be perhaps pushing the fact that it's not a human, whether or not we then, we're able to differentiate, whether or not we're able to make a sort of a more neutral tone is a different matter. But
And it's one of the things that sort of we came across when we were trying to build Beeb was the voice. And ultimately, even with that Q genderless voice, as you say, people will then make a decision either way.
Yeah.
And I think there's a difference maybe between genderless and androgynous. So maybe it's an androgynous voice, so you can choose whether you think it's male or female.
Wow.
Yeah, just a point on Q. You know, Q says it's a genderless voice, but all that Q did is they just got the tone and register to a place where 50% of the people, when asked, said it's a woman, and 50% of the people said it's a man. The first time I heard the voice, I said that's a woman, but somebody else hears it anyway. So our impulse to gender a voice, a human voice, is very strong. Our impulse probably to even gender a non-human voice is also strong. But I think there is really, as Fiona mentioned, an important distinction between is it human or not, and that we can say yes, it's maybe male or female, but it's not human. That's an important line in terms of sort of disclosure and awareness. For people who will be interacting with these technologies.
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting point, because I think the sort of creators are trying to get to as human-like a voice as possible, so that it's engaging and believable and on all those good things. But like you say, there is that responsibility to say, well, actually, no, it isn't a real voice.
And so speaking of this sort of differentiation, one of the, I think, landmarks, I guess, of humanity is our ability to sort of build relationships. Kate, to what extent do you think we can build relationships with AI?
I think we absolutely can build relationships with AI. I think that's something that we do. Again, it's this whole thing about the way we project. So yeah, it's completely possible. But remember that people build relationships with all sorts of things. And if you look at something like the fan fiction world, where people have fallen in love with characters and written these amazing stories about them and created whole universes around them. Yes, it feels real from our side of it sometimes. And maybe that's enough. So I often get people saying, but you can't really love a machine because a machine can never love you back. There are people out there who love other people who don't even know they exist. This unreciprocated love is a really common thing. So I do think we can forge relationships. They might be one-sided relationships, and they might not mimic human-human relationships, but they are relationships, and we are forming them.
People have been forging relationships with things that are, can't even speak back to you. I mean, I can say that I love my coffee machine. I mean, it's true. We anthropomorphize things. It's a long sort of tradition. I mean, we also have relationships with life that is not human. I mean, pets and other things. So it's not surprising that people will be able to forge relationships, with intelligent technology. I mean, we forge relationships with technology that's not very intelligent. It's so essential and important to our lives, and so I very much expect that people will find a great deal of meaning and relationships with AI, and you're seeing it in popular culture. Lots of movies about what these new relationships might look like, television shows. I mean, in a way, sometimes the entertainment world is a bit ahead of us, of giving us kind of previews of what this might look like, risks that it could entail. But I certainly expect that we'll move in that direction.
And the thing about some of these conversational assistants and things is that they're actually being designed to create a relationship with you. So there's not only the natural human impulse, but there's also companies, designers in the background trying to get you to build a connection so that you use it more regularly, so that you spend more money, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and it's already, if you look at the way that voice assistants have taken off, I mean, that's been a remarkable shift in the way we interact, because in many ways, voice is a very natural form of communication for us, and we like to be surrounded by voices. So people, if they're feeling lonely, will often put on the radio or the TV so that they have that sense of being amidst other people. So it's very compelling to have a voice assistant that can reply to you, even if that is just replying in terms, they're really just, at the moment, search engines, but you've got a search engine that can talk back to you. It suddenly feels a bit more conversational. So when those things actually progress, which I don't doubt that there will be progression along the more personalized route, that there will be chatbot improvements that build into these, but when we get to a point where we can hold basic conversations with a chatbot or with a voice assistant, that is a relationship.
So, Kate, in your book, you talk about intimacy and relationships with these systems, and I am wondering, so digital assistants are everywhere we go today. So they're obviously on our phones. You can have them on your watch, and they're in your house in sort of very intimate areas, right? That usually are very private. So, to what extent do you think this shapes the interactions that we have with our assistants?
We know that people are more likely to confide in when they don't have to disclose in front of other people. So that intimate relationship is being set up when it comes to those personal interactions. So if you and we see this being used in things like therapy bots, where people will offload their problems, and that goes right back to the first chatbots like Eliza. People will confide and offload their problems to machines, partly because they feel they're not going to be judged by a machine, but also because they're not directly communicating with someone that they may be talking about something very personal. So that intimate setting, I think, does foster that kind of relationship where you have a degree of intimacy and you are more likely to feel close to something. And when you have that personalized, which, a big goal of AI is to provide personalization, right? That's one of the main things that AI tries to do is tailor things for you as an individual. And when you're carrying that voice assistant around, even though everyone else is carrying around the same voice assistant, you feel that your voice assistant is the one that you have the bond with, even though they're exactly the same. But it's interesting if you look at a film like Her, so the science fiction film Her, where the main character falls in love with his operating system, but then she eventually reveals that she's talking to, thousands of other people at the same time. And he's like, what's going on? I thought you were mine. I thought I was special. So it's really interesting. And again, it's thinking about that hope we have of being understood and not judged and feeling like we have a connection. And again, a very human thing to do. And if we are not getting that from perhaps someone else, or if it can give us something that other humans can't, then it sets quite a strong bond.
In some of our work, we looked at how counseling can use these AI kind of counselors and other things, and to my surprise, there was quite a lot of evidence to suggest that people were willing to reveal quite a lot to computers when they realized, or to systems when they realized there wasn't a human sitting behind it. I think we often look at this, certainly the work we did, we pointed out to some problems with gendering and, establishing unfortunate stereotypes, but there's also a whole lot of, incredible good that these technologies can do and help people and their families. And I think those are some of the examples we had looked at.
The Digital Human explores this with a boy who had autism, or who has autism, and he was learning social interactions with Alexa because he was able to ask questions and there was no judgment or anything like that. And the mum was saying that it was such a godsend because he was then able to have friends. And the first time he brought a friend home, she was just like, this is amazing. And it's because he was able to practice those social interactions with Alexa.
And I'm a tech optimist, I really am. I see a lot of issues with tech that we have to very carefully navigate, but I do see the good with things like this. And, if someone is helped by technology that they can confide in, that's great. We may want to think about what happens if we need some kind of clinical input, if we need a human to be able to come along and say, okay, we think that this is where we can help you. And how we do that while keeping privacy, while keeping confidences is another matter. But this could be really beneficial. The downside of that is if we rely heavily on this technology, what happens if the government decides that's fine, we can cut funding to something like mental health services? Okay, that's something we don't want to happen. We don't want the technology to come in and replace things where there is already an existing need for more support. But I think that this, and as we've seen with the counselling and the therapy bots, this is something that we can use with care once it's been correctly validated. This is something that could have a really, really positive impact.
And I think absolutely, as you mentioned, Kate, there is a risk that as these systems become so good that there's a temptation to divest in the human aspects of this. Certainly, education systems have positioned that maybe we need fewer teachers and other things that like this. And it's not even to say that debate is unreasonable at some extent. There maybe that there are certain tasks that can be picked up, perhaps less administrative staff. I mean, there is an argument to be had about improving efficiencies, but we also see very troubling signs that technology is becoming a solution for underprivileged people.
But also, we need to think about who's making it, and their intentions as well, because obviously you have maybe there are some altruistic companies out there who are making these systems, investing all the time and effort in these systems to give them away to people for all very good reasons. They're very difficult to name, but there are lots of businesses who see that there is money to be made in this, and so their motivations may not be the most altruistic, should we say.
I think it's actually a good way to get into the personality. So Fiona, you helped to design Beeb, which is an experiment by the BBC to develop a voice assistant. So can you tell us more about the decisions that you took when you were building the Beeb's personality?
Yeah, I mean, there were hundreds of decisions, and that's the difficulty. But some of the bigger ones were sort of the persona, because the personality you choose isn't just about what you say; it's how you say it and the behaviour that it exhibits as well. So what we started out with initially was sort of some adjectives that we wanted to get to. They were paired with our user research about where we wanted to get to, and also with the BBC's values, because we couldn't create it in isolation. So the values gave us a really good foundation of sort of fairness and impartiality and diversity to work with. And then we worked on the sort of general personality, which gave us started us down the road for looking for the voice. Once we had that, we realised that a lot of the kind of conversation we were expecting wasn't covered by sort of friendly. So if somebody asks you where do babies come from, and you're being friendly, it doesn't help you to answer that question. So we then had to do some work into the backstory and some sort of guiding principles, and that's where we came out with that we were going to be transparent and open, that it was an AI, and where we were going to say that it wasn't going to have a gender, and we worked a lot on the impartiality, so it wasn't an AI that would like a football team or love a TV show. So how do you answer those kinds of questions when they come along? So we had sort of the BBC values at the heart, and then how do you build a personality from there, really?
Yeah, and how do you make it engaging? Because I think if you're trying to sort of not have opinions about things, you're just like...
There was some interesting conversations about that. So, initially we were thinking we would create some sort of backstory, and it would like BBC things, and so it would always refer to those. And then we took that to our editorial policy team, and they said no, if it's from the BBC, it needs to be impartial. So there's no liking or loving all this stuff. So we're like, oh, well, how then do you work with that? And so even something as simple as, what's your favourite colour? We're not allowed to have a favourite colour. So one of the things, because it's an AI and its perception is that it's hooked into a world of information, we tended to use facts to come back at that. So, for example, with the colour question, what's your favourite colour? We said something like, there are 10 decillion different colours in the world, and so how am I supposed to choose? So it's one of those. So it gave you a bit of a fact and a bit of information, which is a bit interesting, but without actually saying, I have a favourite colour. So that's how we tended to get round it. But it was really difficult, because that's one of the things of how you build that relationship. I know that I think one of the voice assistants, if you asked it what its favourite film was, it would give you a different funny line each time, and that's really annoying because you can't then get a handle on it. And it's interesting because Siri just sort of shuts you down and says, look, I'm not here for that. I'm here to help you with productive stuff. So it's easy for that one. But when you do have a favourite, when you do go down that route, it's like, well, can you pick a favourite? If are they allowed to pick a favourite? You know, if Alexa's favourite film is Pretty Woman, that's an issue, or it's not an issue. I mean, it really makes it difficult.
It's really interesting listening to Fiona talk, and also all the the work that's been done by different companies to build these assistants, because really what's happening is it's a corporate or organizational personification. You're taking the BBC and trying to turn it into a person at some level. I mean, Apple has taken Siri and is trying to infuse its corporate culture, its corporate values, its world outlook into an artificial intelligence. It's really interesting that we're, another way of looking at this is you're seeing a corporate person. Alexa, and I think we see some of that shine through. Alexa sort of being unapologetically a woman, and it sort of mirrors some of the my way or the highway stuff that people see from Amazon. So I think we may see more of that. As you were speaking, Fiona, I was thinking about how if the United Nations were to try to build a voice assistant, what values would we try to give it? I mean, this would we would not do anything for the next 200 years other than try to figure this out. The questions about what languages it speaks, and what it holds dear, and your question about a favorite movie or something. I mean, these be sort of unanswerable for an organization that's an international organization.
And that's the thing, because when you start with those values, they can go in lots of different ways. So you can have, if you were to find people in the world, you'd find lots of people in the world who had the same values as the BBC, but they are different people. But it's what traits can come out of that, and what of those traits are workable, connectable. So like with impartiality, if you had somebody who didn't make a choice about anything, that's actually quite an annoying person. And that's not what you want to put into something that you're developing to try and build relationships and that you want people to interact with. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
So Mark, you co-wrote a report titled "I'd Blush If I Could." That was after the title came after the response from Siri to "You're a bitch," I think. So Apple have since changed the response from "I'd blush if I could" to "I'm not going to respond to that." So do you think that the changes made by the tech companies, because I think others have also changed responses since the report came out, so do you think they're significant, or are they mostly cosmetic in your opinion?
I do think they're significant. I mean, it's important that some of the most egregiously gendered responses, some of these really lame answers that just played to, these very base gender stereotypes were removed. That's a good thing. I mean, it stopped these sort of, casual associations, which can be damaging to gender equity. Also very promising that the recent announcement that exactly as we recommended in the report, that now users will be able to specify the gender of Siri, and that's not a small decision. Apple says there are 1 billion active users of iOS, so I mean that's 1 billion people that now will be given a choice if they want their voice assistant to be male or female. Before, Apple was making that decision for you depending on what language market you were in, but usually they were making a decision to have the voice assistant be female. And of course, all the problems we went through in the report, increased associations of subservience and sort of help with these various domestic tasks. You're speaking to a woman's voice, but now people have that sort of choice. And I think that principle of choice is really important and should be a guiding principle. Is that as Fiona was discussing, there right now there are not too many intelligent AI assistants. The systems are hard to build, expensive to build, but we are seeing a sort of flowering of them, more and more options that people will have, and I think going forward, people will select personalities they like, voices they like, backstories that maybe are compelling to them for whatever reason. In our work, we talked about just very simple systems like navigation systems for cars and things. But Wave, for instance, allows users to select among hundreds of different voices, some real, celebrities' voices, but also voices from, non-real characters, Homer Simpson, or, these types of things. Or you can even use your own voice. You can record, they give you a script and you can say, go left, go right, or you could have your, friend or partner do this. And then suddenly you're getting your navigation instructions from yourself. So that's, but that those choices are very interesting and good. A final thing I want to say here about the choice, though, is with that also comes perhaps problems. That there may very well be people who want a super gendered voice assistant, a sort of sexy young woman who give you sort of spicy answers to your questions and flirt with you and play to every gender stereotype there is, and that's for men and women. So it could also give people a sort of tool to strengthen worldviews they already have. As you're seeing with, for example, with media, people can sort of get stuck in their bubbles, and I think maybe AI might be another. This might go in that direction as well.
Certainly, this kind of thing's already happening in the sex tech world. So the creators of what is probably going to be the first commercially available sex robot, they don't really exist yet, but there's prototypes out there. They've built a standalone AI chatbot, and the manufacturers, it's a workshop, RealDollX, they've come up with this software that you can, for sort of $20, download to your phone, and you've got this chatbot that will respond to you, will learn from your interactions with it, and you can interestingly tweak the settings. They've got this really rather good user interface, so you can decide if you want her to be her. It's very much a her. You can decide if you want her to be flirtatious or kind or sympathetic or funny, and you can use these sliders to come up with the personality that you want to interact with, and she will remember things like your birthday, or will tell you a joke, or will remember your favorite movies, all those kind of things. So that's already there, and the whole idea there, of course, is that they are selling companionship. Not even so much sex actually takes a back seat. The language used in the advertising is very much about romanticism, it's about companionship and relationships. So they are trying to sell you this relationship with an AI who will cater to your every desire.
Do you think that's sort of where it's all going? Do you think at some point we're going to have sort of like Alexa-enabled sex robots, and it's going to be your same digital assistant that is going to blend into that? And do you think that could be problematic? Sure. Oh, my Alexa is going.
She can hear you. Yeah, I mean, I that's definitely where that market is headed, and I do see that we will in our future have more relationships, intimate relationships. I don't necessarily mean sexual, but closer relationships with AIs in this form, in this conversational form. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it's really interesting, but from work I've seen, work I've done, work I've seen others do. So, for example, Julie Carpenter, who worked on the relationship between military personnel and their bomb disposal robots, and she found that people are really good at code switching between technology and humans. So we talk to people from different social groups in different ways, and we do that with machines. They are an emerging class that are treated like humans, but we buy into this. We're not deluded always into thinking that these are real. We have sort of categorized them in our heads that this is something that's not human, but we treat it like it's human. So I think we do distinguish quite well. But then we get into the whole ethical minefield of what happens if we treat these machines like they're human, and will that spill into our interaction with other humans? And that's really, really uncertain. We don't have evidence to know whether or not that effect takes place. And from work I've done talking to, for example, people who own sex dolls, which is seen to be the potential market for sex robots. The vast majority of people that I have read about and spoken to are incredibly respectful of their dolls and treat them really, really well. And this idea that they will sort of somehow inflict harm on these things because that's something they might do and that would spill into real life. I just didn't see any evidence for that at all. So it's fascinating, and it's something that we simply don't know. And we see arguments on computer games, for example. Do they cause violence in real life? There's never been conclusive proof that that is the case. And we've seen thousands of studies on that. So the way we treat machines, even if they seem human-like, we cannot tell if that's going to affect our relationships with other humans.
And I think what's interesting on that is that sort of the way the market's going, there aren't a lot of companies who are able to create an all-encompassing voice assistant or bot or something like that. Many of the manufacturers are creating something that does something specific. So, for example, Mercedes will have a Mercedes bot that only does things in your Mercedes car. If you ask it to turn off the lights in your house, it's got no idea, sort of thing. And there'll be sort of TV bots. So if you've got sort of BBC, for example, there'll be a BBC bot that might be able to talk to you about TV shows, or a Netflix bot that will be able to talk to you about those. It won't be one that talks about TV generally or even the world generally. So I think having that as maybe the future, and you were saying about compartmentalizing, it means that you'll compartmentalize your behavior for each particular one and switch contexts depending on. So if you really frustrated with your TV and the choice that you've got, you might be a bit more abusive to that one than the car that you love, for example.
Yeah, and building on the points that were being made about how do we treat these machines, and how should we treat them, these are also not new questions. In the book that we did, we talked about Hegel talked about a master-slave dialectic and how one treated slaves. I mean, obviously very different time and worldviews, but Hegel argued that if you treated a slave in an inhuman way, it was dehumanizing to the slave owner or to the person who was involved with that person. So that's are we dehumanizing ourselves when we're mistreating something, anything, whether that, of course, I think there's, if it's another human, definitely, but now, if you're mistreating an animal, is that dehumanizing, us? If you're mistreating a computer, is that dehumanizing us? So these are, questions that have long been looked at. And in our work, we saw people coming down on this in very different ways. There were some people, we read essays written by people saying, I will not date a person who mistreats their voice assistant. For me, that's a big red flag. If I walk in, or a man or woman I'm interested in is, shouting at Siri or Alexa, that's a red flag. I'm, not so interested. We also read, very unapologetic essays saying this is a machine. There are companies who are trying to give it a human face. I'm not kind to my toaster oven. I'm not kind to my microwave. I can shout at it. I can swear at it. I'm not getting pulled into this, idea that this thing is human. It's not human. We also read testimonies that, it was a great relief to a family that, some hot-tempered person could sort of direct all that negative energy at an artificial personality rather than, children or other people in the house. And, we've heard about this with animals, somebody who was, shouting at people is now shouting at the dog. And, that's sort of better for everybody. Could the same be true for these artificial intelligences? A final point I wanted to make a little bit separate is this idea of, as we become more and more acquainted to working with technology that's always on demand, is always responsive to our needs, is always, there and ready to help. There's a lot of emerging evidence that is sort of decreasing people's patience, people's ability to have conversations, people's ability to work with other real people who are imperfect, who are not always on demand, who are not ready to sort of, practice subservience all of the time. And so I think we need to be watchful that, there's a lot of evidence that, generations coming up with smartphones and, all these voice assistants and other things do have some trouble with the complexity of human relationships and and the flaws that frankly that people have.
This is the thing. I was getting angry at my printer for many years before AI voice assistants came along. I've called my printer many names that I can't possibly use here, but it's not going to feel anything because it's a printer. And unlike I don't want to treat other humans bad because they can feel. I don't want to treat other animals bad because they can suffer. But machines, I don't have a problem shouting at my voice assistant because I wouldn't do it to another human. But where is everyone like that? I don't know. Is that my own experience? It's difficult. It's a really fascinating area as to how we relate, and it's an emerging area that we've got this wonderful opportunity to study because we are right at the point where this is taking hold. And I think it's just a fascinating glimpse at what we are like as humans in the way that we engage with the world around us.
And I mean, it's really interesting also from the creator's point of view as well, because at the minute, quite a lot of the technology isn't good enough to be able to engage with a human in a nuanced conversation about why what they said was inappropriate. But soon there will be a time. And will that be in the creator's interests to create those conversations? Or will they just accept it because you'll spend more money if you are able to shout at it and swear at it?
And to your point, Fiona, there's no cultural norms around it. That these things are new. So, there are limits to, again, and it depends on it depends on which culture you're in. That if I'm here in France, if somebody starts saying swear words at their oven or, Kate, you were mentioning, your printer or something, it's sort of, that's no big deal. That can be a very reasonable person. But if somebody's shouting at their children like that, or even an animal, that may break a kind of cultural norm. But now that we have these voice assistants and other intelligent assistants, is shouting at them, is that outside the cultural norm? I mean, these things are being kind of navigated, and I don't expect that all cultures will come down on it in the same way. How people treat intelligent assistants in some parts of the world may be very different than how they decide to treat them in other parts of the world. And I think some of that diversity may indeed be useful and valuable.
And it's so interesting what you say about the culture, because it's probably when you're alone by yourself, you will be different to if you have people there as an audience. And so the cultural norms will suggest, like the person was saying, if they saw somebody shouting at their Alexa, they wouldn't date them anymore. You know, if that is a general behaviour, then people will stop shouting at their Alexa. You know, it's interesting how they will fit into the culture.
So I want to thank all of you so much for giving us your time, for joining us. It was a really interesting discussion. You all brought up really interesting points. So thank you again.